Welcome to the on Wax. Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 1 of Rainbows on Wax, brand new podcast out of the Sunshine Coast, Queensland. My name is Alex.
And I'm Steve.
And we're going to talk about music, life, love, everything in between, why we make our lives about music and why we love music. So we thought we'd first, start by kicking off this podcast with maybe doing a brief introduction. We're assuming that, because this is just another podcast to add to the well of podcasts out there, potentially it will just be all of our friends listening to it. Maybe not even our friends listening to it.
My mum's definitely listening.
My mum will listen. My wife won't. She might. But I thought a great way to start this would be to do a brief, not so brief, whatever it turns out to be, introduction on why we like music, why we work in music. For me, it started quite young, but Steve, where did it start for you? What was sort of that, give us the long and short of how you ended up in music.
So the short is, I think going way back, I'm just another nerd that needed that creative outlet, and music was always there, so as long as I can remember, it was listening to The Doors and watching Rage and going to pub gigs with my folks and just watching and monkey see, monkey do,
Yep. Was there I always like to talk about too, I know I grew up listening to my mum's music as well and her records and music she played in the restaurant and things like that. But then I think maybe I was 13 when I went and bought my first CD.
Yeah.
That was, particularly, I had sort of we'd trade tapes and things back in the day, but I always like to know what people buy with maybe their own money or pocket money. Do you have was there a CD or a tape that you can recall? It was kind of your choice.
I got given The Doors' LA Woman by my stepfather, and that the case was so cracked and broken and it wouldn't even shut that I just played that one so much. But what I spent my own money on was, I think it was an Eminem single.
Singles were big, hey?
Singles were huge.
They were affordable because if your pocket money was $5 for a week or something, you could probably, I think they're around $5 to $6, $8 maybe for a single.
Bring back those days,
I know. Yeah, we're actually handing over money. I think mine was probably a single as well, but I do remember the first album was Significant Other.
Oh, dude,
by Limp
actually,
Bizkit.
The first album I ever pirated, don't tell anyone, was that album.
Yeah, incredible record.
Yeah. The hidden song right on the end. Crazy. Epic album. I bought that, I think, similar time to I got a Nintendo. I was playing Zelda Ocarina of Time, so those memories are really entwined together. Still a great album, still holds up. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of having a resurgence again, I guess, being a 90s record. Yeah.
Was it 90s? It would have been early 2000s.
Early 2000s.
Yeah. But that sound, new metal, is kind of having its turn again, and Limp Bizkit is still playing.
Yeah.
Growing up, you sort of listening to that kind of record just felt like the most unachievable dream of being a part of a project like that. And it still feels like that. I mean, Wes Borland is a genius, and you kind of start to unearth and unpick how these records were made.
It felt so naughty listening to that music too, young.
So much swearing. Yeah. Yeah. Really violent.
Very violent music.
Yeah. But, good way to sort of, I guess, get your wiggles out if you need to through music rather than reality.
3/4 shorts, the red cap backwards.
Red cap. Yeah. I was thinking about buying a red cap, actually. I actually went looking for a red cap the other day. I was like, for people who can maybe, I guess, you can watch these podcasts, but I don't have hair, so I wear hats. And I was like, you know what? I think a red cap would be kind of cool. I think I saw Post Malone wearing a red one. I was like, yeah, maybe I could pull one off as well.
It's coming back.
Digressing a little bit. But, I think those are sort of pinnacle moments in in young people's lives is when you start to like take control of your music. You know, we all grow up with people like The Doors, The Beatles, you know, these amazing albums and artists that our parents probably listen to or are part of. You know, most people are lucky enough to have parents that at least were, you know, semi into music. I think my mum, you know, probably your parents as well were, you know, quite into music, and maybe that rubs off on us sort of wanting to pursue that as a career. For me, it actually didn't start till I was maybe 15, 16. I thought I'd do something else. But that's when I was like, oh, you know, music's for real.
So you started pretty early in music, like realizing that that was a path you were going to take? Yeah,
I was pretty academic, you know, relatively good at school, or I could fake my way through school and got good grades. Didn't end up finishing school. But yeah, it would have been 15, started playing live shows in Townsville, where I grew up. So we all liked playing metal music, emo music. This would have been 2003, 2004. So we're downloading stuff on LimeWire because you can't find these CDs anywhere. So it would have been like, you know, older friends giving us like Pennywise records, NoFX records. And then from that, our music would have been like Taking Back Sunday, Thursday, Senses Fail, Under Oath, this kind of post-punk, you know, political music and into emotional music, hence the name emo, coming out of, I guess, like the Midwest of America, but also places like Florida and Alexis on Fire, those kind of albums. But you couldn't buy them anywhere in Australia. Like, they just didn't really exist. These bands didn't tour here. So you really had to use LimeWire to get those out.
Thank you, internet.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, so we covered those bands, and then my mum had put on gigs. Like, growing up, she had a restaurant in Coolum and would put gigs on in the backyard at the Coolum Civic Centre, places like that.
Cool.
So she helped me put on gigs in Townsville with just our friends' bands. And I think the first major one we did was the Amity Affliction.
Yeah, right. That
we met because I lived in Gympie for a period. And they suddenly were a band that could pull numbers to it.
Yeah.
Not that it really mattered, to be honest, in Townsville. Anyone would show up and play, and show up to a local gig.
Yeah.
But it was awesome to have the Amity Affliction come up and play at a PCYC, Aitken Vale PCYC.
Wow.
Yeah. And maybe like
shout out Townsville.
Yeah, Townsville was awesome. I mean, there's so much cool stuff that came out of that whole scene, you know, putting on gigs at 15. And that's when I was like, you know, maybe this could be a career that I get into. No idea how to record music.
You played guitar?
I played guitar and I sang.
Yeah.
I guess the first band, there's a sort of weird running joke in Townsville where we all, you know, there's plenty of bands that got started, and this is really savage, but instead of kicking a member out that we didn't like, we would break up and reform
and
without said person. Yeah. So a few people cop that, which, you know, they know who they are.
Yeah.
So that happened a few times. There was like a couple of like breakup reforms.
Yep.
As the music kind of progressed from emo to screamo. But it was just covers until we started writing original music and recording a little bit up there. And a few artists kind of were a little bit more ahead than others. Maybe they were just older or knew what they were doing. But one of the bands that formed out of there was the Middle East, who, you know, I guess is still the band to this day.
Known from the Middle East of Queensland.
Yeah, exactly. The middle northeast of Queensland.
Yeah.
But they were this metal band called the Grace Enlistment. They broke up, reformed without people, but they renamed. And came back, and they played with Parkway Drive because Parkway Drive were coming to play in Townsville, do a local show. Right. So I booked them just assuming they're going to be a metal band. They were heavier than what they ended up becoming, to be honest. They were more like an indie rock band when they started. I think there's demos out there online that people can find.
I'll have to dig for that.
Yeah. But anyway, that was the first Middle East show. And now I think probably as we're speaking, they're playing in some stadium in America with Zach Bryan, which is kind of a poetic, you know, not ending, but, you know, where they eventually ended up. You know, being, as we know, like growing up in Australia, you felt quite disconnected from the American alternative scene. So you had to go digging and finding this music, and to know that it was happening the other way around. You know, Zach Bryan was a big fan of this band, The Middle East.
Yep.
It's kind of cool that America was maybe doing the same thing with Australian music.
Yeah.
Over there.
It kind of still happens a little bit now too. Well, a lot more now because of the internet and those sorts of things.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot easier, I think, for people to share music. You know, as we know, Spotify, SoundCloud, the million ways that everybody can share music these days.
You're going to discover things whether you like it or not now. So
yeah, exactly. So sort of when, you know, you've been listening to The Doors, you eventually started playing music. What age was that?
So my mother bought an acoustic guitar to learn it, but I think she gave it a good old-fashioned crack for an hour.
Yep.
And then I just picked it up and started, you know, kind of intuitively picking it up in my own way and, you know, play a lot by ear. I had somewhat of 3 guitar lessons my whole life, and I didn't really listen to many of my teachers through life, except for one.
There's always one.
There's always one that gets he still sticks with me. But yeah, it was like monkey see, monkey do for me. My stepfather watched a lot of live music videos. He had a bit of a collection, and that was kind of his thing, you know.
Yeah.
Friday afternoon, just chuck some live concerts on.
That's cool.
In a very small town where I grew up, Mossman, Queensland. So
where is Mossman?
Mossman's north of Port Douglas, north of Cairns. Yeah. So the closest live music was Cairns. Yeah. You know, or your local pub, which was, you know, maybe we had Phil Emmanuel here and there. Those kind of artists, but yeah, there wasn't much going on. So those live DVDs was almost a religion for us. And I remember watching AC/DC live at Donington when just Angus would come out to the crowd and all the wind and the storm was happening, and he just starts shredding Thunderstruck, and I was like, pause, go into my room, just like trying to work it out. I'm like, oh yeah, and then I found guitar tabs and I was like, that's what he's doing, and then you know, just back and forth that way. That's kind of how
guitar tabs was a big thing. that was an awesome way to learn.
It was groundbreaking.
Learn a song. Because, some of those songs can be really tricky to learn by ear, especially if you're, you know, I'd say I'm only a mediocre guitarist at best. Yeah. Just unlocking this whole world of, you know, what to do. And I guess stumbling into music is a way to becoming a part of the music industry and a music scene. I think a lot of people just kind of do it that way, and you eventually find your people and your friends to kind of build the obsession in learning. I remember my first gig, I think, was like a Battle of the Bands in Townsville. And I remember the stage tech or whatever was like, oh, do you want like gain on your guitar? And I had no idea what gain was. I was like, I don't know. He's like, do you want it like a dirty sounding thing? And I was like, I just plug it into my amp. Yeah. And it works. And I probably had an amp that had like distortion on it or something, having no idea what it was. So I think I played the whole thing like with a clean, loud guitar and what should have been like a dirty sounding guitar, and just had no clue what was going on, but didn't care because it was just the most fun, and all of our friends turned up.
My first amp was a little Roland Cube, which had just like, you just switch the setting.
Yeah, I had a Cube too. Yeah. Cube got stolen by Jordan Island from the Middle East. Stole that Cube. I think he took it on tour. I think the first Middle East tour was a Roland Cube. Wow. And it never ended up back in my possession. But whatever.
That's a claim to fame. You should hang on to that.
He took heaps of random stuff. There was a bass that went missing. He took an electric. The electric ended up back in my possession, but it's broken and getting fixed by somebody. A few cool little bits and pieces that's always fun to lend out to touring musicians.
And what was your first guitar?
First guitar, I think, I had like an acoustic that Mum had bought me. So I grew up like here on the Sunshine Coast, and Mum had a lot of musician friends. I didn't have like my dad wasn't around, so most of the influential men in my life were musicians. People like David Flower, Marcello from the Tooth Fairies, and Mark, who was in the Tooth Fairies as well. I remember those guys kind of hanging around, and just parties and gigs and all those sorts of things. Rob Maitland, who was like a musician and a radio presenter, and Rob. We actually rented Rob's house, and he lived in the shed, and there was guitars there, so I would like use them. But I think Mum bought me like a 3/4. I don't remember the brand. Yeah. Maybe like Alvarez or something.
Yeah.
Just a cheap, thrift shop.
Yeah.
3/4 acoustic that I learnt Blink-182 Damn It on. Maybe a Chili Peppers kind of riff. And I think, it was when I went to Maroochydore High, and I played like a little bit of guitar, and I was put in this class of like 36 kids. This was like the dregs of the kids. 36. Thinking back now, it just felt normal, but that's an insane number to have in one classroom. But I was really good at school. So they were like, oh, do you play like music? And I was like, well, I'm learning guitar. So they put me in this music extension class that had 12 kids in it. And that's when I started learning guitar. I think his name was Steve, this guy up here.
Sounds like a legend.
Yeah, he was a legend. And I learned songs like Tenacious D, and we did like a little performance, and that's sort of just when I started picking things up. And then when I went to Gympie High, like they had a guitar teacher in the music classroom, and so that's when I could like play a little bit more. Went to like 2 or 3 different high schools before I ended up in Townsville. And, not to get like too personal or anything, but you start to realize the social things that go on at high school, like how to make friends. And a big thing was because I was smart, I was generally with like nerdy kids, and nothing wrong with nerdy kids, but like 14-year-old me, boy, I wanted to meet girls, like I was like suddenly interested in girls.
Guitar over the shoulder.
Yeah. It was like a great way, like, and especially growing up here, like cool in primary, it was like Julian Wilson and like these amazing surfers and skaters and like really incredibly talented kids that it was just impossible to compete with if you weren't sporty or a surfer or a skater or something, which I wasn't. But then music was like my thing. I was like, I can be cool.
Hitting different.
Yeah. So I remember moving to Townsville and kind of making this conscious effort to be like, I want to meet the punks and skaters and hang out with them. And I did. I sort of met Tristan Mitchard and Jason Lynch. These,
I know Jason Lynch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Jason Lynch was like the drummer in the band, sort of the second band iteration of the band that we had.
There you go.
He runs awesome stuff in Townsville now. Like he's all about pinball and took over Nature's Wisdom. Yeah. Yeah. Incredible dude. Just a legend of a guy. So I met those 2 guys, and they were like, oh, you play guitar? We're starting a band. Do you want to join? And I was like, I'm in. Let's do it.
Yes.
And the band was called Post Affection, which I believe was taken from an Elvis song. Young Adam was the one who I guess came up with that name, and that was like the band that played at the Battle of the Bands, and Tristan was the singer. I think Jason Grevesmule was the original drummer.
I know that name.
Grevesmule.
So what years were you in Townsville?
Exactly, I don't know. Maybe 2003 to 2006.
Yeah.
Probably those years. Yeah.
So I went to Townsville. I was in Townsville for 10 years.
Yeah.
From 2007 to 2017. Then I moved here to the Sunshine Coast.
Okay. Well, it probably was just as I was leaving. So I should have graduated in 2006 and didn't, but I was still in Townsville most of that year, and then moved to Brisbane, try and make it in the big smoke. So you would have come just after that. And I think we had this sort of brand up there called Townsville Mosh that turned into North Noise.
Okay.
So they were the kind of crew that sort of kept putting on gigs after I left. They did a few, and obviously, some of them sort of kept going and branched off into other things. But that was what was sort of going on up there. I love Townsville for that reason, because there was like nothing to do.
Yeah,
it's all
everyone's
flat.
Just consolidated into one zone.
Yeah. You can ride your bike everywhere. You can get around. The house parties were out of control. If you were there in 2007. I'm sure it was still the same. Really out of control. Really thinking back to it, and now that I have children and I'm an adult,
kind of dangerous.
Really dangerous, like street fights.
Yeah.
Sunshine Coast was similar when I came down too. It was, you know, I'm sure like if most people keep their nose out of trouble, you don't find it, but I definitely found it a little bit, and but loved it. Loved that potent upbringing of kids just sort of being left to their own devices. The beginning of mobile phones, like really the beginning of the internet.
Yeah.
I kind of look at that like
MySpace era.
MySpace, MSN Messenger.
Yeah.
Like we were the guinea pigs of a generation that was impacted by that, you know, like to have access to that technology whilst being a teenager. That's what's unique to this age group of people who are in their 30s or approaching 30. The previous generation didn't really have, you know, there wasn't that availability to it all. So parties, if someone's throwing a party, everyone can find out about it quite quickly. It's not like a big secret. So yeah, that was definitely what got me into music. And I don't know if it's like cliche or a bit obnoxious, but it was like, you know, how can I like separate myself from the rest of the world to be unique and to have my thing, which, you
it's
know,
good that you had that realization. Like, for me, I messed around with so many different, like, let's say demographics, and, you know, it was footy, it was like coming from where I come from, the culture was footy, fishing, and drinking. You know, so, you know, when I actually found arts culture and those sorts of things, it was like, wow. Like I was like a kid in a candy store, you know. And I guess I craved it for so long in life, but never really understood what I was craving. Yeah. You know?
Finding your people,
finding your people, and just that creative inspiration, that constant inspiration. Yeah. So, you know, I'd go to shows and just be the sweatiest person at that show, and you know, I'd push my way to the front and just be on the nosebleed not the nosebleed section, but on the railing, and just getting crushed against the railing. But you know,
I always thought that too when it was like the nosebleed section. I always thought that was the front,
because you'd be banging your head against the thing.
Because you're banging your head and you're breaking your nose, right? Like you're in the pit. Like I never got why it was the back of the room.
Because you're so up in high altitude.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Well, I think you're right, and like what I've been talking about a lot recently, I know there's always sort of trending words in music, and there was this big one I think last year, which was like authenticity was this big one, but I'm hoping the new one can sort of be an obsession. I think it's what pushes people into music, careers, love for it is this obsession for it, and it is like getting in amongst the crowd, like sharing music with your friends, finding new music, finding things that are interesting. Yeah. You know, pop music and popular music is awesome in a lot of ways. There's plenty of it that's great. But really obsessed people, you know, we understand sort of why it becomes great and where the alternative scene has kind of bred this growth of, you know, the underground kind of thing that everyone starts adapting and using as their identity. As it comes out the other end. But yeah, that obsession I think is what is most important in
I agree.
Anyone wanting to be any part of the music industry, whether it's the performance side or the business side. I think that's the thing that separates the wheat from the chaff.
It makes people, you know, the obsession is what keeps people coming back. And you know, I like talking about those shows of just being that sweaty little dude.
When was your first show? When was like your first band? And
my first big name act was Jack Johnson, Xavier Rudd, and G Love and Special Sauce in Cairns at the Cairns Convention Centre. Yep. And same thing, I reckon I was like 40 kilos just up against the railing getting crushed by people.
Yeah.
But you know, that was, I wouldn't say that was one of my favourite gigs, even looking back. But, you know, seeing Carnival at what was once called, what was that venue in Townsville that they turned it into a gym? It was like Bombay something? No. Anyway, it was a big music venue, but seeing Carnival, like trying to learn guitar and whatnot, and you know,
Bombay
there was
Rock.
Bombay Rock.
Yeah, could be
Bombay
that.
Rock.
Yeah.
They turned it into a gym.
Yeah. Weird.
Anyway, but like, you know, you're being exposed to what was on the radio and what was on Rage and Channel V and all those sorts of things. Like, you'd only see a certain amount.
Yeah.
When you'd find these underground acts that absolutely blow your mind, especially in a live scene, like watching bands like the Mars Volta, Carnival, Cog, like all of these progressive bands that were so technical in what they did. I was just like, how the hell are they doing that? Like, who was their guitar teacher? You know, like how did they learn that?
Yeah.
Like the drumming, the technicality of all of that music and how it fell together. And that's where I was like, okay, I need to dig even further. Like, I need to go absolutely deep.
Yeah.
You know, I was still exposed to Hendrix, Zeppelin. Like I knew, you know, of the gods, but that this kind of technicality still existed, you know.
And it's different too, to that sort of, like, obviously Zeppelin are amazing, you know, but it was a whole nother world. They were kind of at the beginning of it all, whereas we were kind of witnessing
what was right in front of us, you know, and
what it had turned into as well, like, because it's probably, you know, every artist has their own sort of unique approach and unique output, but seeing, I guess, the children of the songs of Zeppelin is kind of what we get to listen to now. Yeah. And Zeppelin is a tricky band to get into.
So fluid. Like, it was never the same song twice, you know?
No, they were like a folk band as well as being this kind of rock band. Maybe more so a folk band in a lot of ways, which I always find funny. Not that I'm a huge, like, knowledge guy on Zeppelin. Definitely have my favorite songs, and there's like bits and pieces of their career that I really love and enjoy. Probably more of a Beatles guy, or the band is a big one of mine as well.
Very good.
Yeah, and I kind of found, like, I'd always known them, but then really found them later in life to dig into and kind of, you know, unearth what's sort of going on with their songwriting and their where they got to. Why they got there, how they got there, all those sorts of things. Really incredible band. There's a lot of like musicians bands as well, I think, that are out there that musicians tend to kind of fall in love with rather than a broad audience. Totally. For all sorts of different reasons that we, you know, find these acts and love them. And I'd say the band is probably one of them. I think they've got famous songs, but if you love like their catalogs, you're probably a musician.
One of the hardest working touring acts.
Yeah.
Weren't they? Like
16 years of it or something.
16 years on the road.
Yeah, playing with Bob Dylan. Like,
wow.
Just, really incredible band. Broke down a lot of boundaries as well with the whole sort of black-white thing that was happening in America because they were Canadian and were being snuck into black music halls to play to predominantly a black audience with a bunch of white guys. Like, you know, I love how music, there's all these little stories that you sort of see how it kind of greased the cogs and you know, I don't want to comment on any sort of broader politics of the situations, but music definitely had its role to play.
It was the weapon, straight away. You know?
Yeah. And it just, like, you know, as we see, like, there's, you know, and I'm sure it does exist, but like, those race barriers were less of a thing within bands. Like, you just saw the crossover happening back then. And again, we didn't grow up there. We don't know exactly what it was like. But just looking back at it, you can kind of see like, oh, these cultural things that, you know, probably shouldn't have been happening, were being broken down by musicians and,
this universal language at the end of the day, you know.
Yeah, they just appreciated each other for music and no other, nothing really, nothing else got in the way. Which is really cool. And again, too, like, I guess that happened in our own way with punk music and rap music as well. Like, it was alternative music in the late 90s, early 2000s, but it was becoming the biggest music in the world.
Yeah.
You know, rap, hip hop, and pop punk,
Yeah.
pop music, you know, after 2010 was arguably some of the biggest music in the world, especially hip hop that kind of went and took the, you know,
I love
took the
hip
top
hop.
tier.
I love hip hop because it just breaks every rule in music.
Yeah.
Like, you know, they steal music off other music, but it's not really stealing. It's just like us using our own inspiration and putting it back in. But the fact that it just broke so much ground so quickly and diversified so quickly and grew faster than any other genre, like, it's crazy.
I guess coming back
it still blows my mind, you know.
New metal as well, like bands like Limp Bizkit that really bridge this old punk, metal, and hip hop all into one, which, you know, formed the genre new metal.
Yeah.
And you had artists like Wu-Tang, or I guess Method Man at least, featuring on these albums.
I love that song. What is that song?
I don't
Nookie?
remember. No, it's not Nookie. It's the one with Method Man in it. I'd have to open it up to
I've got the lyrics in my head right now.
Yeah,
so good.
Really good track. Yeah.
But even like bands like Korn did that.
Korn, Linkin Park.
Yeah.
I'm sure there were sort of other ones, but they were definitely the ones that bubbled to the top that I knew about. And all that. I know there was like beef. I know they always have beef. There's beef right now with like Drake and Kendrick, right?
How funny is that album cover that Kendrick released? You see that?
Yeah, with his house on it or something.
The house with all the sex offender markers.
Oh my God. They're really going at each other. I never know if these things are real. I feel like it's like these people have so much money, so much power.
But it was a streaming competition, basically.
Yeah.
And Kendrick blew it out of the park. Like, Kendrick's streams just like, it broke Spotify just about.
It did. Yeah. I looked at the numbers. Like, this is crazy. It's like 50 or 49 million streams or something in a few days. Like, really unbelievable. But again, I'm like, I always wonder, you know, just because I'm a conspiracy theorist, I'm like, is this just to push up numbers for yourselves and like you actually have no beef? It's all just kind of, we'll never know. It could be for real, and that would be cool too. Like if they are just wanting to have a crack at each other, and you know, I think it's always good for those top tier people to, you know, have
I'm gonna believe it for the sake of it. I'm gonna believe it.
Yeah. I believe it. You know, I just have no clue if it is real or not. But yeah, anyway, the beef's back because back then was Eminem and Fred Durst. Was it? They were always at each other.
Slipknot and Limp Bizkit still got beef.
Yeah. So I know, and then like Method Man, I guess being on a Limp Bizkit album, kind of like was almost a diss to Eminem as well. But again, you know, was it all just kind of for real, or were they just like, hey, this is going to sell more albums for all of us? Either way, it was great music. So
any publicity is good publicity, right?
Yeah. We all get to benefit from that.
So what brought you into the production realm?
I guess almost stumbling into it. I know we made our first little like 3 songs in Townsville with a guy up there. I forget his name. I think he might have been in the Divinals.
Oh, he taught me. What was his name?
He was a teacher at a school.
He was at my university. Yeah. That's how why I went to Townsville, to go to James Cook University.
Yeah. So he was up there at a school. Great dude.
Yeah.
We kind of went in there, like, had no clue what to do.
Yeah.
Played live, like, overdubbed vocals maybe. But it was, like, really alternative music. I don't think he'd maybe ever heard anything like what we wanted to achieve. Plus, we were just dodgy musicians. So it turned out how it turned out. But I was a bit, you know, an egotistical kid. I was like, well, I'm going to learn how to do this because I'll do it better. And bought a Motu.
Yep.
That was my first little interface. I think because like Sufjan Stevens used one.
Yep. Okay.
I think I heard that he had this like Motu thing that he started with. So I was like, I'll get that. And a little bit of gear. No idea how to use it. Mark Myers, who was the Middle East producer, a similar time, he had bought gear as well to record the first Middle East stuff. So he gave me pointers on Logic, like how to bring up a track, how to load it up. And I recorded just friends' bands in my basement in Brisbane. And that was sort of the beginning of it. I ended up going to SAE, but that was sort of a weird course. It's kind of like, hey, let's learn everything but music production for the first 6 months.
Right.
Like, let's do, Illustrator and Photoshop and web design and all this kind of crap.
They've switched that now. You do the elective
sense.
at the end, basically. They're
Makes
like, you just
way
got to
more
do
sense.
one more thing. So,
Because I was like, I'm done. I went to the Brisbane one, and then I was like, well, I want to go to the Byron one because maybe that'll be different. It was the same.
Yeah.
So I just ended up partying and drinking and not studying because I was like, this is a joke.
That was my Townsville experience.
Yeah.
Straight out of high school.
Yeah.
Went to James Cook University, and it was like that. It was just this vague, like I needed music, and the closest thing to me in Mossman was James Cook University in Townsville, which was 6 hours away.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a music course. It was new media arts. So it was like touching on every kind of creative media that you could do at the time. And I think I did maybe a total of like 4 hours of music a week.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just started partying.
Yeah, same. I was just always out there. I did my because SAE was, 4 hours a day, 4 days a week, maybe 3.
Mm-hmm.
Tiny amount, like actually on doing stuff. I think you obviously end up doing more stuff, and I'm sure they've changed it now.
Yeah.
No diss to SAE, but it wasn't working for me. So I was just like, I'm just going to figure this out myself. Ended up getting into live production, doing live PA, crewing, stuff like that for years. Mum started working at the old museum, so I was in there just doing the live sound. And occasionally I'd record stuff, not really, like just for friends or like if we were mucking around or doing something at home, or I had a band at the time, so we'd demo stuff out. But then my band started recording, so yeah, Will Davey was our producer, a good friend of mine, amazing live engineer, amazing studio engineer. And so when we were in recording our band, I just wanted to hang out the whole time and learn from him and just like pick his brain about what he was doing. He was a very meticulous sound engineer. Very, amazing, like what he could do, very highly trained. But a really long, tedious process of making music, and I was just there for it. I used to drink back then, so it was just like, let's get a bottle of Jack and a carton of beer, and that was like every day for weeks or however long we were in there. It was only really when I met Corby, Matt, years later through Rowan, and we all started hanging out, and Matt was like, oh, I want to like buy my own studio gear. So he bought a bunch of stuff, set it up at his house, and I was like, well, I can help, I'm not like great at it, but like I'm happy to kind of push record while you're figuring stuff out. So he had all these like people kind of flying in and riding, and he was sort of getting somewhere, not really. And I think I was working at a cafe at the time. And I was like, dude, I really want to like record and write music with you. He's like, well, I'm just about to like book this place for like 3 months in Berry to like write this album. He'd written a few songs. Do you want to come down for like the whole time? And I was like, yeah, dude, I'm there. Quit my job.
Which is the album Telluric we're listening to nowadays.
Yeah,
right?
Telluric. Yeah.
Great album.
Yeah. So that was like me and Matt, like we'd been dabbling for maybe a year or two, just like getting slightly better at Logic and like figuring out how things sound. But then, we got like 3 months of being in a shack with some cool gear. And then Dan Hume ended up bringing some even cooler gear when he was driving. And we spent 3 months kind of doing that. And then that made Telluric. And then obviously Dan Hume finished that one at Sing Sing. But, I get to go down for a few days and hang out at Sing Sing. Just this sort of reckless kid. But then again, Matt was just keen to write. So he set the studio back up at his next house, and we'd go in there and spend, a week or 2 weeks every month writing, recording. And that's how we figured out the songs started to sound a little bit better. Every time it was like, we kind of like know like where we're going and how we want it to sound and how you make a kick drum punchy and not,
how to record the floorboards.
using probably this microphone.
Yeah.
Better and better mics and more
Yeah.
outboard gear that he was just, able to buy as we moved along. And
Mm-hmm.
there was no sort of formal training.
No.
It was like,
It's just cutting teeth.
yeah,
Yeah.
here's a compressor. Cool, let's look it up. Dan Hume uses it. It's a
Mhm.
160A DBX. Let's buy two of them because he uses two and he does these things called like parallel compression on it. What is
Yeah.
parallel compression? I don't
Yeah.
know. Let's YouTube it.
Yeah.
Figure it out on YouTube and then
Yeah.
plug things into it and turn it on
Mhm.
until it starts working
Mhm.
and then start turning it down.
Mhm.
I think that was definitely my thing, was like using way too much stuff
Mhm.
over 8 years
Yeah.
to eventually kind of use nothing.
And when you discover that moment, right?
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah. You get it and you're like,
Yeah.
oh, the microphone does all this work.
the mic.
The preamps do all this work.
Yeah. And the player.
Performance. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was my, production journey.
Yeah.
What about you?
Quite similar, actually.
Yeah.
Like I kind of, I got to it a lot later in life. Finishing uni in Townsville with a drinking degree.
Yeah. I got one of them too.
Yeah.
Had to hand it in there.
Kind of just realized that I was not going to make any money,
Yeah.
but I had the worst mindset ever, basically. Still very young and naive, and I just kind of bounced around all these different jobs. I worked in hospitality, I worked in the mines, I worked as a janitor at a school for a week.
Yeah.
I ended up getting laid off in my mines job and realized I needed job security, which is a myth.
Yeah.
I got a trade as a mechanic and worked as a mechanic for 7 years.
Yeah.
I was still a mechanic when I moved here, but I never put the guitar down. Like, being a mechanic was just so depressing. And, man, the most thankless job you'll ever be involved with.
Yeah.
Like, everyone expects the world, but no one wants to pay for it.
Yeah.
So, super toxic environment. Every day I'd go home and just pick up the instrument and write music. And I was kind of like playing music with a band at the time, and just like lived for that moment on stage, and I moved here 2017 and kind of had a big life moment that really did change me forever.
Yeah.
And realized I could be going down a path of, being super unhappy in life, or change it. And I was still, drinking and drugging quite a bit. And
Yeah.
had an epiphany and basically left mechanics for good and went to SAE.
Yeah.
And wasn't going to settle for anything less, basically. I just like needed to be in music somehow, some way.
Yeah.
And still playing in bands and, figuring it out, and went back to uni and killed it. Like, I basically was told by my teachers that I couldn't do something, so I did it.
Yeah.
I just had that mindset of like, nothing's going to stop me from pursuing this. And
being a bit more, older as well. I think like
Bit older.
There's maturity to it
exactly.
as well. That especially like rather than just being like a reckless punk musician,
Yeah.
like you want to be a producer. Like there's a responsibility.
Yeah, and I had those moments, and
Yeah.
I felt the negative reciprocation from those moments of
Yeah.
being quite reckless and
Yeah.
whatever. But I definitely wasn't going to settle for anything less other than music. And I finished my degree, smashed it. Like, I made a full-length record while I was at uni
Yeah.
with my band at the time, and I think I was in the last 2 months of my degree, and I got an internship at Yamanui
Yeah.
with Paulie Bromley and OJ, legends, shout out.
Yeah.
And learnt so much of those guys.
Yeah.
Like being next to Paulie and just meticulously watching his edits and like basically being his safety net, not even knowing I was doing that, you know. And I learnt about I learnt the choice of microphone. Like I knew what microphones were and how they could work and what kind of mics did different things, but like you said before, it's that choice of microphone for the source, and you know, using the room in different ways, and performing in certain ways to get different outcomes. And you know,
the only real way to get there is trial and error, though.
Trial and error. It's just, absolute trial and error.
Yeah, you need to hear it. You need to feel it.
And another thing I learned, which I never thought I would learn, is like, it's like you put on the psychologist hat in moments, and you're coaching artists when they are the most vulnerable. And that was like, I was like, okay, there's way more to this than I could have ever imagined. And you know, it's so addictive. Man.
Yeah, the results are addictive, and it's like I always compare it to like a video game or a sport.
Exactly.
Video game more for me. I don't really play sports or surf, but I'm sure like anyone who's a surfer would know, like when you can actually catch a wave, it
finding
makes a whole
flow
difference to like just falling off a wave, or if you play a video game and like you win a race, or like you achieve something, you finish a level. There is a sense of accomplishment to it, and it's the same with a song and finishing a good song. Well, not just a good song, but it sounds good, and you were a part of the whole process, getting it to where it needed to go. Even if you didn't mix it, even if somebody else ends up mixing it, you're just a producer, but you helped pick the mixer, and you like worked with them all the way through, and you get to these results that are like
so rewarding.
I
always like joke to my clients about editing. I'm like, this is like mowing the lawn for me. You look back at all that fresh cut grass, you know, it's just like, take your head off, have a cold drink.
Exactly. It's a epic rewarding process, aside from just the technical side of it, of picking microphones, picking preamps, compressors, and all those sorts of things that capture the best performance of an artist, but then having the results on the other end of it being a really decent song, and getting released to the world to listen to it.
And it's immortalizing. You know, it's like a photograph and time and a place, and you can always look back at the work you've done and be like, oh yeah, like that's where I was at, you know, that's where this band was at, you know, like
exactly.
Matt Corby in the early days, you know, compared to what he's doing now and the way he approaches the process. It's like,
there's a lot of things, I guess, in Matt and I's relationship, aside from just being friends, that, you know, I didn't realize either. Like, he was kind of at the height of like his career when I met him. You know, he had 2 massive songs, but he wanted to take this whole new direction with his music and the way that he was making it. And that was the role I got to play for him, was this like patient person to be there while he figured out what he needed to figure out in the records that he wanted to make. And to be honest, most of the music Matt and I wrote didn't get released. It's unfinished work, but there's pieces and principles and practices within the songwriting that he got to then take, and you know, he writes with a handful of people and apply those things that I think, you know, a lot of which we learned together. You know, we were doing our traineeship together. I was learning all these different things. We had strengths and weaknesses in all sorts of areas and sort of supported each other. That got to this kind of more holistic side to making music. Definitely the way I love and prefer to make music. It's the hardest way to do it, the rarest way, the most expensive way, because it's not just like churning and burning hit songs. It's like potentially writing 10 to find one.
I would love to hear that back catalogue.
Yeah. There's plenty there to listen to, and we would, you know, Matt and I have talked about sharing it one day as well. Just like all the things that didn't make the cut, the early versions of songs. We see bands doing it all the time now, releasing demos of songs, beats, beautiful little melody lines, things like that you capture. And again, as producers, you sort of know, and the principle behind it is like, oh, we're just trying a new plugin. It can be as simple as that.
Literally.
Yeah. And you're just having a bit of fun, and you're like, oh, we've, like Matt and I figured out auto-tune and tuning vocals maybe 8 years in.
Mm.
We just didn't do it. We didn't
Yeah.
know it was a thing. We knew
Yeah.
it was a thing. We just
Yeah.
didn't do it. Refused to do it.
Yeah.
I do it now a little
Yeah.
bit, but you know, it's still something I like to avoid. There's this like real ego there with like, how pure can we keep this?
Totally.
Yeah. And again, like those things come into play a bit more when you have budget, when you have time, when you have musicians and players that can do those things. Not every project lends itself to being able to do that, which is fine. But when you do get lucky and you sort of get those amazing projects, so like, yes, this can all remain pure. It's awesome. And when you get the crossover of like these amazing songs plus the purity of the recording and all the process, it's really when you can make something quite special. And then if the world responds and goes, yes, I love that one, and you make a hit song or something, you know, that's got to be the golden moment in any songwriter or producer's life. I don't think I've made any what I would call like hit songs.
Yep.
I don't know what I love all the music that I make, but yeah, I don't know.
It's subjective.
Let's say 100 million streams.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's say a song that gets 100 million streams has got to be a hit song, right? So I'm not there yet, but yeah, you never know.
Soon, Matty will do it.
Yeah.
Matty will do it.
Oh, there's so many, like even kids up here, you know, I reckon
Yeah.
there's so many kids up here that, again, like the big interventions I think that I'm noticing even in between us is mentorship. You know, at some point in our career, we found the mentors and we had the obsession. We just needed the mentors to kind of pull that obsession into a direction.
Yeah.
And then from that direction, you hone in on the craft.
Totally.
And then you spend time figuring
And then
that
the
out.
lesson of leaving your ego outside the door.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you gotta
Not
put that
not
away.
being attached, not trying to
Yeah.
like milk an idea
Yeah.
for your own ego, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, should we leave episode 1 there? Is that enough? I'm sure we're going to go into more backstories,
Totally.
anecdotes, different things throughout the this podcast series. For anyone who's stuck around this long, we appreciate you for listening. Hopefully, you may have learned something. I know Steve and I have spoken about this, but aside from this idea, I guess, kind of came from the music club that is run up here on the Sunshine Coast, which is just a collective of musicians that get to show up once a fortnight, share wins, losses, anything. There's generally a theme. So we thought a cool concept for this podcast might be to reflect some of the themes that we have at the music club, because we're getting real interactions and opinions from local musicians on the Sunshine Coast. And
And we might even take it to them to get
Exactly.
some Q&A.
get some Q&As. There has been some Q&As from that podcast where we've had Matt in, we've had the Dregs in, we've had different people in, and I have recorded some of them. Some of the recordings stuffed up because I didn't have headphones and couldn't check my microphone. But all of Matt's stuff that he spoke about works really well.
Maybe we can AI ourselves into it or something.
I can sort of sub it in.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I guess like, you know, each week we'll try and tackle a different subject that probably applies to anyone who's semi-regional in Australia or the world, you know, trying to figure out how to hone their obsession into a reality.
Yeah. You've been listening to Rainbows on Wax.
Rainbow.